Okay, it looks like we're live.
We're
Hello.
on.
Yes. Hello, and welcome to the end of the first week of our summer sessions, which has been brought to you by the Centre of Ecology and Conservation at the University of Exeter. Our department is based at the beautiful Penryn campus here in Cornwall, and we teach the biosciences undergraduate and master's degree programmes. All week, we've been sharing stories about the teaching and research from our staff and our students on the theme of forests. We're really proud of how much active research and outreach is done by our students. And so, for example, we've shared student-run projects like Life Nature magazine, the Natural Selection podcast, and blogs from field courses to forests around the world. We've also shared research into reforesting Cornwall and protecting orangutans in Indonesian forests threatened by palm oil plantations. So if you want to find more about the summer sessions from this week or the rest of the summer, or about our department, have a look at the web and social media links in the webinar chat. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Frank Van Veen. Frank has been working in the rainforests of Indonesian Borneo for many years now. He works closely with the Borneo Nature Foundation to protect threatened rainforests for the health and well-being of people that live in Borneo, as well as for the wildlife that depend on the forest. He leads undergraduate field courses and scientific expeditions to Borneo. He's journeyed into some of the most challenging parts of the jungle, and he's played host to some fascinating tropical parasites and diseases along the way. Frank will talk to us for about 10 to 15 minutes, and as you're listening and have questions for Frank, please post them in the chat below the webinar. There's about a 30-second delay between us speaking and it appearing on Facebook, so we won't be able to answer questions during the talk, I'm afraid. But if you type them in as you think of them, then they'll be ready for us to answer after the talk. Okay, take it away, Frank.
Thank you very much, Regan. Welcome to Borneo. As you'll notice, we're doing this actually live. We haven't pre-recorded a video, hence maybe that we started a little bit later due to technical hiccups, but I hope that from now on it'll all be nice and smooth and plain sailing. So before I start, I just want to say that I'll be talking about projects that I'm involved in Borneo, but all of those projects are in collaboration with lots of other people and organizations. So when I say we, I mean lots of other people that I share the credit with. However, if I get anything wrong, then I shoulder the blame. One organization that I do want to highlight, and Regan mentioned them already, is the Borneo Nature Foundation. So this is an NGO based in Borneo that who are involved in all of these projects that I'll be talking about and are in fact the driving force behind it. So I suggest you go and find their website later on and find out more about their work and maybe how you would be able to contribute to that as well. So let's have a look at where we are in the world. Now this is already not working the way I wanted it to. Hold on, bear with me for 1 minute. Less than that even, sure. Here we go. So I hope you can see the picture of Google Earth now. So Borneo is this big island here, slap bang on the equator, about halfway between Southeast Asia and Australia. So it's the third largest island in the world. It's about 3.5 times the size of the UK, so properly big place. It's home to the largest remaining area of rainforest in Asia. So it's very important for conservation point of view. Now, if you look at this picture of Borneo, you'll see some of it, about half of it, is this dark green shade. The rest of it is bright green. Now, the dark green is where there is forest. The bright green is where there isn't any forest. If we've been able to go to look at this picture back when I was a teenager in the 1980s, that would have been pretty much all dark green. All of the island would have been dark green. So there's been really significant deforestation in that intervening time. And that deforestation has definitely not slowed down in recent times and is not expected to slow down either. So conservation of these forests is really is an urgent matter. you'll see that there's a big blob of green in the center. That is where, so most of the forests are, remaining forests are in the central mountain range here and the associated foothills. Much rarer is to find remaining forest in the lowland plains. An exception from that is in central Kalimantan province in the Indonesian part of Borneo. I'll zoom in on that. You see there's a substantial area here of fragmented but substantial areas of remaining rainforest. And just to give a sense of scale, so central Kalimantan province, as outlined in these in this dashed white line, is about the size of England and Wales together. So it may only be one province, but it's a properly big one. And so our projects are concentrated in this lowland area. And today I'm going to take you first of all to the Rungen forest landscape that I'm outlining here. This is an area of unprotected forest that we're trying to get on the conservation map. This is where we'll be spending most of our time, because that's where we get to do the glory work of going on expeditions and doing biodiversity surveys and yomping around virgin rainforest. But I also want to touch briefly towards the end on work that we're doing in Sabangau National Park. So this is a protected area, but that nevertheless still experiences significant threats. And the nature of our work there, both of our research and our conservation work there, is very different. And then finally, we'll briefly go to the east here, where we're starting a large new project, where we're not so much talking about conservation, but actually about restoration in the context of sustainable development. Well, so let's go to the Rungen forest first. So this is this area of forest here between the two rivers, the Rungen and the Kahayan. It's a substantial area of lowland forest of a specific type, or mostly of a specific type that we call karangas. It's very different from the type of forest that you find in the hills, or that you find further south, for example, in Sabangau. Sabangau is peat swamp forest in the hills. You get this loam soil dipterocarp forest, but this area in the middle is very different. And this area in the middle has very much been ignored, ignored is the right word, by biodiversity researchers, by conservationists. People either go to the south into the peatlands, or they go north into the hills, but they skip through this bit in the middle. And so this has been really a conservation afterthought, this area. Now, currently, if you look at, if you were to look at the land use planning maps for that the government has for this area, you would notice that virtually all of the Rungen forest landscape is destined to either be logging concession, or oil palm concession, or some other plantation concession. So acacia plantation for oil palm, for example. So most of this forest is due to disappear in the next couple of decades, if that long even. And so it's really urgent for us to get this on the conservation map, to draw attention to the potential biodiversity value of this. Now, of course, we can only do that if we can actually provide evidence that this area does have high biodiversity value. And so that has really been the focus of our work here, is demonstrating the conservation value of this area. And where do you start with a thing like that? Well, it's literally, going right into the middle of it and zooming in, dropping into the middle of the forest and figuring out what's there. And that's pretty much exactly what we did in 2016 when we did a month-long expedition there. It was organized by Borneo Nature Foundation in collaboration with a local university, the Universitas Muhammadiyah Palangkaraya, and the local community in Mungkubaru village, where the indigenous community that lived there were very concerned about what might happen to their forest, and are very interested also in conservation work here. And of course, they also are the people that know the most about the forest. They know how to navigate it. They know most about what lives there. So they are really valuable collaborators in this as well. So what we did really on that first expedition is to do what we call a bio-blitz. We went there for a month and we just tried to record as much biodiversity as we could find. And so I just want to show you some examples of the kind of things that we found and that we looked at. bear with me for a moment. There we go. Sorry. So the first thing, obviously, that you'll find in a forest is lots of trees. It may sound a bit obvious, but it's something that you'd be surprised how often that is overlooked. And actually, recording the diversity of trees is not an easy matter, because getting hold of the expert knowledge, the expert botanical knowledge to survey the tree diversity is not that easy. But this is where the local community, the local Dayak community, really was super helpful, because they know this forest very well. They have many uses for many of the different species, so they have really good species recognition. And so our initial surveys are based on the local species names, the local names for all of the tree species and kind of species concepts that they have. And then gradually we've been matching those local species to what we recognize as scientific species. And we find actually that matches pretty well. So long story short, we find so far about 200 different species of trees in this area. Apart from trees, there are many other interesting plants, like these pitcher plants. This is Independis ampullaria. Interesting in its own right, but also interesting interactions with animals. So this one plays host to the world's smallest frog, which breeds in the little pools inside the pitchers. Rafflesiana, Independis rafflesiana, just a very pretty one. And sometimes can play host to roosting bats, this one. Loads and loads of different insects, so butterflies, groovy stick insects, things that look like fungus at first glance, but these are actually, this is a colony of a type of leafhopper, so Homoptera. These are all insects with these waxy excretions that make these woolly things. You get large spiders. This one is about the size of my hand. You get really funky spiders. This is a centipede. You get really big centipedes here, and you might be able to see these big jaws on it. So these things are venomous, and I really recommend avoiding those if you ever go to the forest as much as you can. Only watch them from a distance. I got that wrong. I managed to sit on one, and I can assure you it's very, very painful and caused hallucinations and everything. So, yeah. Reptiles we have not surveyed that much, but it's clear that there is a high diversity of them as well. This one here is a Bornean killed pit viper. One of these has managed to bite one of my my master students. So we have really good evacuation protocols in place now, thanks to that. And no one has suffered any lasting effects. I just want to highlight the freshwater fish as well. We find a great diversity here, such as these blue catfish. This tiny little red sliver on my finger is an adult female Pedocyprus. These are the world's smallest vertebrates. Incredible things. This is probably the species that got me most excited that I found here. You know, small minds, small things, all of that. We find new species of fish, new to science anyway. Of course, they're not new to the local people, they know about them. We also find, so these two fish here, they might look quite similar at first glance. They're both species of Rasbora. The top one is Rasbora cephalatania. It's really widespread in Thailand, Malaysia, island of Sumatra, and quite widespread in Borneo as well. Whereas one at the bottom is Rasbora patriyapi. That one is really only known from this particular area, from this Rungan landscape. So we find species that have really, really narrow distributions. And an important consideration with these freshwater fish is that they don't get a lot of conservation attention, really, freshwater fish, but actually they make up a huge proportion of vertebrate diversity. And a very high proportion of them are actually threatened. So for example, last year I was part of a work group for the IUCN Red List, where we assessed, I think it was 400 species that occur in the greater Sundaland region. So that's most of Indonesia, plus Malaysia, Singapore, that area. And of all those species we assessed, which is only a proportion of the total that live in that area, but that was all that we could manage in a week. But of all of those, well, 1/3 we couldn't assess because there is not enough data available on them. But on the 2/3 that we could assess, half of them fell in threatened categories. So it's a fair assumption that about half of all the freshwater fish in this region are threatened with extinction. And when we looked at which species, what the species that were threatened with extinction had in common with each other, two of the main factors were living in Borneo and living in black water environments. So these are the kind of waters that we get in this Rungan landscape and also further south in Sabanga, where I'll talk to you about later. So from a conservation point of view, these are actually really, this should be a really important group of animals to focus on, but don't get an awful lot of attention. So I just wanted to draw your attention to them. Now, of course, there are also mammals and birds and things. They are much harder to record in the forest by just walking around and bioblitzing it on the hoof. To record them, we need to use other methods like using camera traps. So, you know, so these are cameras that are triggered when an animal moves in front of them. And I just want to show you two examples of some of the animals that we found on our camera traps during that initial expedition. Bear with me one moment. There we go. So I think we can say for certain that there are orangutans in that forest. I'll just sit here. And this second video from the same camera, camera 13, lucky number 13. So this little cat, this little brown cat, may not look like much, but this is a Bey Cat. So it's a species of cat that is endemic to Borneo, so it doesn't occur anywhere else. And in fact, this was the first record of this species in this region. This was a record that was about 100 kilometers outside its known range within Borneo. It's the first time it's been recorded in this habitat. And this species is really rare and really elusive. So in fact, this is only the second time that an individual has been caught on film. And this particular clip was used in the BBC series Big Cats a few years ago. That's how special this recording was. So I'll just show it to you again. So it's really clear, it's become really clear that this is an area of high biodiversity value. Now, we've got species here that are critically endangered and all sorts. So after that initial bioblitz, we then were interested in, you know, asking where in this landscape might we find the highest diversity, the forest of the highest biodiversity value. It may not be evenly distributed, and being realistic, we're not going to be able to get all of it protected. So if we want to have maximum biodiversity value conservation strategy, we're going to have to know more detail about how the biodiversity is distributed through this landscape. So let me share with you this picture here. So you see on the left here, you see a picture of this landscape in lots of different shades of green. And those different shades of green all indicate different forest types, different habitat types. And so an obvious question is, you know, how that diversity, how the different animals and plants are associated with different habitat types. Do we get higher diversity in particular habitat types? Do we get different species in different habitat types? So should we focus on one particular habitat type? Should we focus on on preserving as much diversity of habitat types. What will work best to preserve the highest amount of biodiversity? And so to answer questions like that, we started doing more systematic camera trap surveys and other surveys, but I'm just going to show you some results of the camera trap survey. And this is work being carried out by PhD student Shari Mang. And I'm just going to show you some of the results from her camera traps. Because at this point, I can't really give you an answer yet on the questions I just posed, because all that analysis is still ongoing. Shari has got tens of thousands of camera traps photos to wade through and then to do that landscape scale analysis. But I'll just show you some of the highlights. So some of the things you get, and I should say, Shari put camera traps not only at ground level, but also up in the treetops. And so there you get lots of squirrel things like this rather large squirrel. You get very small squirrels. Have you found it yet? Can you see it? Where's the squirrel? It's, oh, you can't see my cursor, but it's, oh, here we go. It's around the left over here. And so in actual fact, we've got the smallest squirrel and the largest squirrel of the world in this forest. And the challenge is to see them both in the same tree. We've got sleepy squirrels. We've got things that look like squirrels, but are they squirrels? Look at that pointy face. We get big cats. We get small cats with spots. We get small cats without spots and with short tails. Small cats with some spots, with long tails. We get scaly things. We get forest chickens, the bears. We get hornbills. We get different kinds of hornbills. Posers, yes, we know there are orangutans here. We get another kind of ape as well. These are the gibbons. I'll come back to gibbons in a minute. Other primates, not such attractive primates. What is this? Please don't say that this is an ii. Iis are in Madagascar. I hope I got that right. And by the way, I'm not telling you what any of these species are, because I think that is something that I would like you, if any of you know what all these species are, please post that in the comments. If you don't know, we can go back through that later on if people are interested, and I can show you, I can tell you what all these things are and what is so interesting about them all. We get lots of these kind of mongoosey and civety things. Many of them nocturnal. Look at this one. Doesn't that just look like a Tasmanian tiger? Could it be true? Or what else could it be? Weaselly things. I put them in there especially for Robbie McDonald if he's here. Piglets. Tiny deer. This is a mother and foal deer. That foal is about the size of a rabbit, and the mother is not an awful lot bigger. You also get more standard sized deer. And we get animals taking selfies, like this bear, orangutan, these monkeys. And this is actually one of our big cats that was a bit too close to the camera, so you can only see his whiskers. And actually this one was scent marking the camera. So yeah, we're finding lots of biodiversity, and we're trying to work out how that is distributed over the landscape. Now, as well as recording how much different animals are there, in order to put it on the conservation map, it's also important that for particularly charismatic and critically endangered species like orangutan, that we put in extra effort and record what the population size of those things is. And the best methodology for that is to, well, for orangutans, that means we make use of their biology. So orangutans, what they do every night, because it's really hard to count orangutans in the forest, and they're incredibly good at hiding for us. But what they do every night, every single orangutan builds a nest to sleep in. And so that is the smoking gun that we can find. And so if we do transects throughout this entire Runga landscape. When I say we, it's not actually been me. They have done transects throughout the Runga landscape, recorded the number of nests through along these transects, and then with some mathematical jiggery-pokery that has all been tried and tested, we can then convert that to actual population density of orangutans. And so our assessment of orangutans in the Runga landscape is that there are between 2,000 and 3,000 in that area. That makes this the largest unprotected population of critically endangered Bornean orangutans. Now, that is really important information for getting this area on the conservation map. It means it brings it to the attention, of course, of governments, the relevant government departments. It brings it to the attention of the oil palm companies, because they don't want, they also don't want to have the label stuck on them that they have destroyed much of orangutan population habitat. Other species that we can, another example of how we can survey species is that the gibbons, so that gibbon that you saw hanging in a tree a second ago, the thing about them is that they live in small family groups in territories, and they announce where they are to each other every morning by singing at each other. So the best way of surveying them is to go out and listen in the forest every morning to their singing and record where the song is coming from. And one way of doing that is to get loads of people in different locations in the forest, and all of them recording at the same time from what direction and at what time you're hearing gibbons singing, and then combining that data, and then you can pinpoint where different groups were on that particular morning. This is very labor intensive, of course. And so what we're doing now, and this is work that is being led by a colleague from the US, Dr. Wendy Earp from Cornell University. We have an array of 14 passive acoustic monitors, so basically sound recorders set up in the forest that are recording most of the day, every day in, day out. They are recording the sound of the forest. And every 10 days, a local team from Munkibara village goes around, changes over the batteries, rechargeable batteries, of course, we are environmentally aware, and change the SD card and download all that data. And so we've now got more than a year, or more than a year and a half now, of worth of recordings, daily recordings from 14 monitors of forest noise. And so I just want to play you what those gibbons sound like, and then I'll show you what we can do with those recordings to work out where the gibbons are in the landscape. So what you see here is a spectrogram of a gibbon, of a recording of a gibbon song, and I'll display it to you in a second. What you'll hear first of all is kind of a bit of bumbling around, which is probably the male of the group, and then you'll see on the spectrogram here, you see these lower notes coming in. This is when the female starts. I'll point it out when she starts. So here we go. This is what we call the female great song. It's such a fabulous noise. This is what we wake up to most mornings in the rainforest. Yeah, it's absolutely fabulous, really. Such a great such a great place to live for a little while. But so we have these recorders, we have these tens of thousands of hours of recording from these recorders. And actually the big challenge with that, of course, is to get the information that you want out of these sound files. And so what we are currently working on is, so using software and using artificial intelligence to spot the gibbon calls in those recordings from all of those different recorders. So you can tell the software to look for these signatures of that call in the spectrogram and to automatically detect those. Now that looks easy enough. If you look at this spectrogram, it should be very straightforward to pick out the gibbon from here. But this was a recording from a gibbon, so where the researcher, I think this was actually Wendy Earp, who was standing underneath the tree where the gibbon was singing with pointing a microphone at it. So this is a very high quality recording. But when the singing happens hundreds of meters away from this passive acoustic monitor, then if we as humans listen to that recording, we can pick out that gibbon singing in the distance, even though there are lots and lots of other noises, much louder in the foreground. But our ears and brains are really good at picking out the noises that we're looking for. Computers and software and artificial intelligence are not nearly as good at that yet. So this is still in development, but what we're working on, what we're working towards with this is that we have automatic detection of gibbon calls from all these recorders in the landscape, and we actually get daily records of what the density of gibbons in the different areas and the different habitats in that landscape is. And so we can start linking, so as well as with the orangutans and these gibbons, we can start linking their distribution across different habitats, also how that might change over the seasons and over time, and how it changes over space. So this is, so this is the work that we're doing in the Rungan landscape, really to try and put this area on the conservation map. That is really the stage where conservation in this particular unprotected area is at. Now let's go back to Google Earth. Leave Rungan, zoom out, here we go, and head south. And so here we've got Sabangau National Park. And so Sabangau National Park is a place that is the kind of work that we're doing now in Rungan. That kind of work happened here in the 1990s. And it got protection status as a national park, as you can see. And so you'd think that we're out of the woods there. And this is, so I should say, so Sabangau National Park is about 6,000 kilometers square. So it's a proper sized area. It's home to about 6,000 orangutans, which I believe is the largest remaining population of Bornean orangutans anywhere. And so this is a real success story, it seems, but there are still threats, and these threats are actually linked to the activities that happened in Sabangau before it became protected. So what you should know about Sabangau is that this is peat swamp forest. So the substrate, the ground here, consists of peat, many meters deep, in areas as much as 15 meters deep. And so peat is basically undecomposed organic matter. This is permanently waterlogged soil where all the leaf litter and the organic plant material that falls down in it doesn't decompose but gets preserved as peat. So this is a very specific type of habitat. Now, in the 80s and 90s, there was a legal logging operation here. So this was selective logging where the high value big trees were removed. And those logs were removed using a railway that ran through the forest. When that legal logging operation came to an end, illegal loggers moved in and carried on cutting down trees. But the legal loggers had taken a railway out. So the illegal loggers, in order to get their logs out of the forest, they dug canals through the forest, canals in the peat, to float their logs out of the forest. And some of these canals are like dozens of kilometers long. They are, huge effort. This is kind of industrial scale illegal logging that went on. Now, this illegal logging was stopped in the early 2000s. In 2004, it was declared a national park. And so it seemed all was well. But what remained was those canals that had been dug in there. And these are a really big problem because they are draining the peat swamp. They are draining the peat, the water from the peat, and the peat is gradually drying out. And so in dry season, particularly dry seasons, so naturally, even in the dry season, that peat layer would be waterlogged. But nowadays, in particularly dry season, the top layer of the peat, and that can be quite a sizable top layer, meters deep, can completely dry out. And now it becomes, and then it becomes very flammable. And that is the big problem that we're facing here now. If I zoom in, you'll see these lighter areas appearing. These are burn scars. This is where the forest has burned down. And these are areas that are, dozens of kilometers square. And in fact, we've estimated from satellite imagery that since 2006, or this was from 2006 to 2015, that more than 800 kilometers square of forest was lost in Sabangau to forest fires. So this is a huge area. And so the work that we are doing here now is really focused on preventing these fires and reforesting these areas. And so this is work that is funded by the Darwin Initiative. So this is UK government money. And I'll just show you a quick. So this is inside one of those burn scars. So you see there's no forest left. This is one of those canals through which the forest is draining. And what we're doing here is building these dams in it to stop the draining of the swamp. To slow down, we do have to keep an area open. I won't go into the details of that. And the idea is of the design of these dams is that they've got these bits on the side where we can plant trees that will eventually, the roots of those trees will replace the dam. So this artificial dam that we've built will eventually rot away and be replaced by natural dams caused by the root balls of these trees. And so we're experimenting with damming these canals, and you have to build dams like every 10 meters or less in order to reduce the flow enough. And so that is part of our work. Also, we work with local communities and have established firefighting teams that are really important at containing fires before they burn out of control. And we're doing reforestation trials. Because what is special, unfortunately special about these peat swamp forests is that while research has shown with a lot of tropical rainforest that the best way to do reforestation is just to leave it alone, and natural regeneration is the best way of re-establishing those forests. With these peat swamp forests, when they have burned, and because the fire goes into the ground, goes into the peat, those forests do not regenerate by themselves. So we have to give it a helping hand, and we actually have to plant trees in it. So we've now got a huge tree reforestation trials set up. And again, this is very much in collaboration with the local communities who grow all the seedlings for us, and we buy them of them. So this actually creates a livelihood for the local communities as well. And we set up these reforestation trials. Right, let's go back to Google Earth. So that, in a nutshell, is the work that we are doing in Sabangau. And finally, I just want to briefly say something about a big new project that we're starting up in this area to the east of Sabangau. So this is where there is no forest. In fact, this area was deforested in the 1990s as part of a big government scheme from the then government of Indonesia to build a huge rice production area here. The idea was for this to be a major area for food production to feed Indonesia. So a large area of peat swamp forest, similar to Sabangau National Park, was cleared. So it's about 1 million hectares. And if I zoom in on it, you'll see there's all these lines running through on it. These are all canals built in there to manage the hydrology of this area, to manage it as agricultural land. Now, unfortunately, it turned out that managing the hydrology of this area and growing crops in there successfully turned out to be very, very difficult. And the way that the agriculture here was managed as well is that tens of thousands of people from Java, known as the transmigrants, were moved to this area because there was this area was uninhabited by indigenous people, to farm this area. And so lots of smallholder farms that were not really equipped to deal with the really challenging conditions here. So not much food has ever been produced in this area. Many of these communities live in poverty, and much of the farmland has been abandoned. But as you can see, forest has not regrown. Mostly what has regrown is scrubland. Through these canals, again, the peat has dried out, and this area has now become a real epicenter of peatland fires that happen on an almost annual basis. But in some years, when we have particularly dry seasons, that is really, really bad. And I'll just show you. Am I sharing the right thing here? There we go. So here you see some pictures of fires raging actually in Sabanga Park and in this mega rice area, as it's known. These fires are so bad. You see here, this is the south coast of Borneo. So this is a satellite image, and all of this was covered in this grey yellow color. That is not cloud, that is all smoke from these peatland fires. The impact of these peat fires is absolutely immense. And so in 2015, it was estimated that the carbon emissions from these peatland fires over the course of 3 months were in the same order as 4 times the annual carbon emissions of the entire UK economy in a whole year. So what the UK burns in terms of fossil fuels in 1 year is only a quarter of what was emitted from these fires in just 3 months. So this is a huge scale problem. Now, all of this smoke caused immense health problems for all the people that are living in this wider region that have to breathe it in. And it's estimated that at least 100,000 people will die prematurely as a result of it from respiratory diseases. And the cost to the Indonesian economy was also estimated to be in the order of $16 billion US. So this is a huge, huge problem. And we're just starting a big new project there, doing research to support Indonesian government efforts to prevent these fires in the future. And this is a really ambitious project that they've got, is to restore the hydrology of these areas, of this enormous area, to reforest it and to reforest areas of it and other areas of it to make agriculture successful, to both increase food production and to revitalize the livelihood of the people that live there. And so we are just starting a big new project funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund to support these efforts of the Indonesian government. So we're doing research into monitoring hydrology, we're doing lots of sociology, sustainable agriculture, reforestation research, all together with many Indonesian collaborators and other collaborators around the UK. So that's where we're at there now. So looking back at all that, so obviously we have 3 projects there with really very different, well, in quite a small area in a way, but with very different issues going on in terms of conservation of biodiversity and environmental issues. And so I will leave it at that, and we'll turn to your questions. Thank you very much for listening. And I'm sorry if I went on a little bit long.
Hi Frank, this is going to sound weird on Facebook because I don't think the people on Facebook can see me, but I'm going to be asking you some of the questions that the people on Facebook have posted.
Okay.
And my name is Regan Early for those who are listening to this disembodied voice. So the first question for you, Frank, from Jenna Lane is, where is Frank exactly?
Well, so currently I'm in Constantine in Cornwall. But my background is a place in central Kalimantan, so further north from any of these places I showed you, called Gunung Bondang. You see behind me, if you look carefully, you can see a mountain there. So that is the mountain known as Gunung Bondang, and that is the first place, my first ever trip to Borneo, that's where I went. And it was probably quite a bad choice of place to do my maiden trip, because well, it's a mountain, and I wasn't very fit at the time. And it was just me and one other guy and 2 local guides. And the 4 of us climbed this mountain, and we did it in the middle of the night because then we could see the sunrise. It was basically, it was such a bad idea, the whole thing. I nearly died on that mountain. Actually had a moment where I went, go on without me, come back for me. It literally was, but I did manage to walk off the mountain by myself. But having said that, you know, yeah, so it's a significant place for me in Borneo. And that's why I chose it as my background.
Well, we're glad that you made it back, Frank. We've had some suggestions as to what those animals are, but I suggest that we hold them for the end, and we'll end with a recap of that amazing footage. Right. So your PhD student, Shari Mang, says that she has 600,000 photos to sort, and it made me wonder, do you have any idea how many hundreds of thousands of photos or hours of footage or recordings you might have, you know, with and only a very small fraction of them actually has these amazing videos and sounds on them?
So I'm actually the wrong person to ask this question of, because as you tell, so it's Shari that goes through those photos, and she'll know that she'll be able to tell you that an awful lot of those 600,000 photos will have nothing on it. The camera will have been triggered, and especially with the cameras up in the canopy there, the camera will have been triggered because the tree was moving around. With the recorders, well, the sound recorders, there is always something interesting. And I mean, there again, we must have hundreds of thousands of hours of recordings there now. And that really is the big challenge. It's very easy to get the recordings. It's very easy to get lots of camera trap photos. The big challenge is actually processing all of that and getting useful data out of it. And so this is why, you know, with the sound recordings, we have to really turn to artificial intelligence. And we're making our job at the moment as easy as possible by focusing on the gibbons, because they've got such a distinctive call, and we can actually train artificial intelligence software to look for these particular sound, you know, spectrogram signatures. And if the artificial intelligence doesn't work, we can have teams of undergraduates scrolling through these spectrograms, or actually just sitting there and listening to recordings. And that is actually really important as well. You need to have these data sets of ones where you've manually gone through it, and then, because that is something you use to train the software. You tell the software, well, this is what you're looking for. This is what you're looking for. And then you also have to go through where the software thinks it has found the thing you're looking for, but it's actually not the thing you're looking for. It's a false positive. So you also have to go through those and tell it, no, you got that wrong. So there's a lot of manual work involved in that. So this is the artificial intelligence side of it. There are also just simpler algorithm-based approaches that you can use for detecting the signatures. They tend to be less sensitive to finding the distant things. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, glad to know that there's a really big role for undergraduate research there. A question from, and I apologize greatly if I butcher your name, but Vichka Howell, was there anything that really took you by surprise, such as an animal you didn't expect to see?
Yes, so many things, and I think that this is actually one of the brilliant things of going to a place like Borneo, that every time I go, I come across something that not alone I've never seen before, but I didn't even know that it existed. Maybe it shows that I've never paid too much attention to mammals. So on that first expedition in Rungan, that Colugo, you know, so this is maybe I took it out of the slides actually, but so a Colugo, I don't know if you know a Colugo, but a Colugo is a mammal. It's a nocturnal mammal that glides. So it flies at night through the forest from tree to tree, and it feeds on tree sap. And it's such a weird looking thing, and it's actually evolutionarily, it's the sister group to all of the primates. And on that first expedition, I was lucky to see one in broad daylight, because I was standing at one point in the forest, and I had sent some of our volunteers out about 50 meters away to go find a good camera trap location, and they must have disturbed that colugo, and it flew from where they were, and it landed on the tree right next to me. And so that was a really big surprise for me, and a real revelation, maybe to someone who paid more attention to the kind of mammals you might find in Borneo. That would not have been such a surprise. But
and it might be helpful for our listeners to know that your background is actually studying very, very tiny parasitic wasps.
Yeah, well, yeah. Although I do have quite a broad interest in general in biodiversity. And as you noticed, I take particular interest in the freshwater fish as well. And so in there, so what is really exciting there is that, so we found at least 3 new species of fish. I mean, where can you go in the world where, as an amateur, as I really am in that field, can you go and find new species of vertebrates? Absolutely brilliant, right? But I think the species there that amazed me the most was that tiny little red thing, the thing that I could hold on my finger, that little red sliver. And we have so many of that kind of thing, like the smallest in the world. So this is the smallest vertebrate in the world. And some people dispute that this is the smallest vertebrate in the world, because there is a frog that has a shorter body length, but it actually has a higher body weight. So it depends how you measure it. But actually it doesn't matter, because that is the frog that lives inside those pitcher plants. So if we don't have the smallest vertebrate in that fish, well, then we've probably got it in the frog. And we've got the world's largest woodpecker and the world's largest squirrel, and also the world's smallest, as I said. Yeah, so many surprising things.
Fantastic. I'm going to follow up on the question on what you were talking about before, which was about the camera trap footage and trying to identify the sounds or the images from those blank images or recordings. And 2 people, Jacqueline Ellis and Juliette Poydats, have asked if you would use citizen science to try to sort some of those videos. So perhaps setting up some kind of online program for people to sort through those videos.
Yeah, that is a really good idea. It's certainly something that we've considered. We haven't done that yet, but yes, it's definitely something that we should consider. Maybe as it does take some training, so that is the problem with that. It's not something that anyone can just pick up within 5 seconds, because a lot of the time you think you're looking at a camera trap image with nothing in it. But actually a trained eye will quickly pick out that actually there is an animal, a bit of an animal just in the corner. And I'm sure someone like Sherry, who's gone through thousands of these images, only has to see the tip of an ear of a mouse deer, and she'll spot that there's a mouse deer there, whereas most of us would not spot that. So that is a difficulty with using citizen science. And this is maybe where, not really using is the wrong word, but engaging undergraduate students could be potentially a good middle ground there. Because we assume that undergraduate students in our field are interested in the first place, keen to be trained in these methods, and maybe so there we can actually maybe supply the training and get ourselves an army of volunteers to help us sort through a lot of this. Yeah, definitely something we're thinking about.
And on that, then Brendan Godley is asking, can you outline how undergraduate students could get involved in your research in Borneo, perhaps apart from working on this huge database of photos?
Yeah, so there are many different ways. So one way is indeed working on these databases, and we've had actually a number of undergraduate students who've done their dissertation projects using our enormous database of camera trap photos, and actually just taken parts of that to answer specific questions on smaller parts, or just to focus on particular species like the sun bears. So there are actually numerous desk-based projects that we've done. But we've also had, I've lost count of how many, I think it's been at least 25 undergraduate students now that have taken part in some of our expeditions out there, and have done their dissertation research as part of these expeditions that we've done there. So they've gone out for a month into the field, have helped us with the biodiversity research, and then taken part of our data set back home with them to analyze for their dissertation. So yeah, there are, you know, that's kind of the other extreme end, like getting out into the forest yourself. And on the other end is working on this huge database of data that we're building up.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to ask you 2 more questions, and then perhaps we can dive into the footage and see if any of those animals are identified correctly. So Jacqueline Ellis says, are the canals being backfilled to stop the draining?
No, we're not doing any backfilling of the canals. So the hope is, and the expectation, and this is something that we're monitoring as well as part of our research that we're doing with the canal filling, is that once you block the canal, you get a buildup of organic material behind it. So the damming is kind of the start of a natural process, ideally. So like I said, those dams, we plant trees on them, so that the trees eventually replace the dams, and you get a buildup of organic material behind it. Once you get that buildup, you get other trees growing there as well that are able to grow, and gradually those canals should then, when the flow is diminished, they'll start filling up with organic material. Especially in the areas, so the photo that I showed was in an area where the forest has been lost. Now in those areas, it's going to take a long time for organic material to fill in because there's nothing really to fall into it. Whereas in the forest, where we're also doing this damming, that filling in happens a lot quicker because of course there are trees, there's a canopy over the top of it. You have a constant rain of leaf litter and other organic material falling into it. And when those canals are not flowing, that material sits there and builds up. And so, actually backfilling it ourselves would be very difficult also, because what do we backfill it with? We can hardly start digging the soil around it and fill it in, because then we create a new problem. And so we would have to import material to fill it in with. So the natural process is really the only way.
Okay, thank you. In that case, final question then from Ottilie Bright, who asks, from the data you've collected so far, when or do you think you might have enough persuasive evidence to turn this area into a protected area?
Well, so I think we've definitely got enough evidence, persuasive evidence. So it's really now at the stage where it's persuading the relevant people involved to protect the area. And this is quite complicated. It's not as simple as saying, here's all the evidence, we hand it over to a government agency and they decide yes or no to put a stamp on it. It doesn't really work like that, unfortunately. It's one of the things about Indonesia that makes it particularly complicated is that land ownership is really complicated. So it's not just one entity that determines what happens to that landscape. It's not like we can go to one government department and they decide what happens, because they might have control over some of it, but all those local indigenous communities that live along the rivers on the edges, they have also got stake claims on part of that, and they can actually apply to the government to have self-governance of their area of forest, and then they can decide what to do with their area of forest. So they can decide whether to preserve it as forest, or to sell logging rights to it, or to sell palm oil plantation rights to it. So there are areas that are controlled by local communities, there are areas that are controlled by the government, and then there are several government departments that will be involved in making decisions about what happens to that. There are areas, quite sizable areas, that have already got oil palm plantations concessions on them, but they are still forests. So those plantation companies have not yet converted it. So we can try and convince those companies not to convert their forest, but to keep it as a conservation area. Because each of these oil palm companies, they have an obligation, if they sign up to the sustainable oil, the roundtable for sustainable palm oil, to designate at least 10% of the area that they control as high conservation value forest, and to maintain it as forest, so not to convert it. So we can talk to these different companies that are involved and convince them to leave at least 10% of their area that they have. And then the challenging bit is, so you have all these oil palm companies, you have all these different indigenous communities and government that controls other areas, and try and link them all up. So you create one continuous area. So you try and convince all these different groups not just to make little islands, but to join this all up. And that is really where we are, I think, at the moment.
Fantastic. And that sounds like it answers Jacqueline Ellis's last question as well, which was just about how long this kind of process could take. So
years.
I can tell you that we've had identified a mouse deer in your pictures.
Shall I bring up the pictures, and then
yes, please.
We can see what is what. Where did I put them again? There we go. So let me go there and head back. No, I'm gone past the mouse deer. These are the mouse deer. These little things.
Mm-hmm. That was Jenna Lane correctly identified those.
Yeah, so this is actually the lesser mouse deer. We've also got the greater mouse deer, which is slightly larger.
Jan Stepana said that there was a Tayra in one of the pictures.
A what?
A Tayra.
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 Okay, that might be a different name for. Does it? Which one would that be? I don't know.
If Jan is still there, can you post in the comments and let us know what you're talking about? Well,
yeah.
They're all of the IDs that we have, so maybe you can tell us what these are, Frank.
Okay, well, should we start at the beginning? Let's go to the beginning. This is where I'm going to get found out when I'm. So the squirrels. The big squirrel is the Sunda giant squirrel. These are really noisy things. We often hear them in the forest, and they're close to our camp. They're really cool, and they're quite variable in their color. So they can be like this kind of multicolor like this one. Some of them are nearly all black. Some of them are kind of all blonde. They're really, yeah. And their alarm call, we call it, yeah, it sounds like a Star Wars space battle. It sounds like laser guns. No. I can't do it, sorry. Well, they are really good in that respect, because they often tell you that there's a raptor around. So the few times that I've seen birds of prey actually in the forest, I've been alerted to them by these giant squirrels. So the little one here is a pygmy squirrel. We have two species of pygmy squirrel, and I forget which one this is. But the pygmy squirrels also have interesting calls. They just sound just like little songbirds. When you hear them, you think it's some passerine songbird. And when you see them, they also look like a little bird scooting through the trees. But they're actually, they are the size of a sparrow as well. So really cool little things. This, I think, the sleepy one is a plantain squirrel or something similar. You can recognize them by the dark and light stripe on the side. Of course, Shari might correct me on some of these. I'm sure she'll be happy to post any corrections in the comments. This thing that looks like a squirrel is not a squirrel. This is a tree shrew. So in Borneo, you get actually a number of shrew species. So we have shrews in the UK, things that look like mice but aren't mice, but about mouse-sized. So in Borneo, you get these things, you get shrews that look like squirrels and are squirrel-sized. And generally, you can tell them apart clearly from squirrels because they've got a pointy face. But confusingly, there is also a squirrel-faced tree shrew, and there's a shrew-faced squirrel. But I don't think we've encountered either of those. But they can be confusing, and much as the local people have fantastic knowledge about the biodiversity here, they have only one word to describe squirrels and tree shrews. They're all the same thing, they're all tupai. That's it. We don't bother distinguishing between them. The big cat, that's a Sunda clouded leopard. This is the only big cat. We actually get them on camera trap reasonably regularly. So there must be quite a few of them around. The ones you get on camera trap on the ground are nearly always males. It seems to be only the males that come down to the ground, and they probably travel quite big distances, whereas the females, we think, stay up in the canopy and hardly ever come down to the ground. And maybe Sherry can let us know, but I think she would have told me if she's ever found on her treetop camera traps whether she's ever encountered a female clouded leopard, because I can't imagine that there are only males. But it's the same here as in Sabanga. There, females are very rare to be recorded on camera traps at ground level. But they're such a handsome animal, really beautiful. I've never seen one in the flesh. Most mammals are really difficult to see in the forest because they hear us coming, and of course the trees are always getting in the way. This small cat, this is a leopard cat. This is actually one of the more common wild cats endemic to Borneo. So there are 5. So we've got all 5 here. So we had, because we had the Bey Cat on the video. We had the clouded leopard. This is probably the most common one. This is actually one I have seen once at night walking in the forest. This one is the Flathead Headed Cat. This one specializes on fishing. So you always find them near water, obviously, because that's where fish are, by and large. This one with the long tail, this is the marbled cat. So this one and the previous 2, they're all kind of house cat sized wild cats. It's a really fluffy thing. We think that these ones spend most of their time up in the treetops as well. So that's all 5 of the Bornean wildcats that we get here. This, of course, is a pangolin. Thankfully, we get them. No, we don't get loads of them, but we get them occasionally, and very occasionally. I have a video of one somewhere, because the babies ride on the back of their mothers, but I don't have that video here. It's in my office, and so I can't access that at the moment. These forest chickens, this is the crestless fireback, and locally they're known as ayam hutan, which literally means forest chicken. You always get them in pairs. So this is the male, the one with the white tail, and the female. Always in pairs. It's interesting, we also get a partridge here, the black partridge, the other chicken-like thing, and they're also always in pairs. You can always count on it that if you can see either a male or a female, the other one won't be far behind. Sun bear, these are actually really common on our camera traps. So there must be quite a few of them around, and I think they probably range quite widely as well. So not every time we get a sun bear on the camera trap, it's a different individual. We'll get the same individuals often, but we can tell that we get multiple individuals, and there must be quite a high density of them. And I've heard them several times in the forest, but I've yet to see one. But maybe that's a good thing, because they can potentially be a dangerous animal. This is one of the animals, even though they're only about the size of a Labrador, so it's one of the world's smallest bears. They can do some damage, and local people are rightfully very respectful of them. They will tell you you don't want to encounter them. This hornbill, now I'm going to confess that I'm not entirely sure which one this is. I could take a punt on it being the wrinkled hornbill on account of the wrinkled horn, but I haven't got the my Borneo bird book on me, and I'm also not much of a twitcher. Maybe someone else can tell me. And I think that this is probably the Asian pied hornbill. But we've had, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there are 8 different species of hornbill that you can find in Borneo, and we've had most of them in this forest, but I can't remember which one we're missing. But we've had, so the iconic one that is often used as the bird of Borneo. You see it everywhere as used as as exactly that. The bird of Borneo, east of Kalimantan, is the rhinoceros hornbill. We've recorded that here several times. It's got a really often you hear them more than you see them, but they've got a really goose-like honking call, and they're really loud when they fly over their wings. I think they're I'm going to tell lies now about that they're missing some kind of secondary feathers or something, but in any case, when they fly over, they're really noisy. Their flight is really noisy. You hear this like whoosh, whoosh sound as they fly over. One really interesting record that we had, and I was really proud because it was my then 17-year-old son who spotted them, is the helmeted hornbill. This is a critically endangered species. He swore that he saw some flying over our camp early in the morning before everyone else had got up, and we all said, no way, Alfie, they've never been recorded this far south. And then later that day in the forest, we heard their really distinctive call, which is like a series of whoops followed by a mad cackling laugh. And I won't embarrass myself by imitating that, but it's so distinctive, it can't be anything else. So he was right that he'd seen them. But we've only had a single record of those, and that's a species that really is in very big trouble, because they are hunted for their casques, which is used in Chinese traditional medicine.
Well, Frank, just before you move on from hornbills, Shari has just chimed in to say that yes, indeed, that first picture was a wrinkled hornbill.
Yay! I should have bluffed it more. Well, this, of course, is an orangutan, and this is another male orangutan. The male orangutans have these big flanges on the sides of their head when they become mature. And so we've, it's amazing how hard it is to see orangutans in the forest, because they're so good at hiding. Sometimes you hear one, you know there's one around, and you really have to sit really still for hours until they'll move and you'll actually be able to get a glimpse of them. But a few times, so our colleague Wendy Erb, who I mentioned for the Acoustic recording, she's actually got years of experience of studying wild orangutans in the forest, habituated ones in a different area. And she started habituating, or trying to habituate, some individuals by finding them and then following them. And so some male orangutans have a thing called the long call. So they advertise their presence to other males and to females. I've actually got a recording of it. I could play it to you in a minute. But what Wendy does is, like, she'll hear a long call, she'll get her GPS out, and she'll drop a pin in the place where she'll note what direction it's in. She'll have a pretty good guess at the distance. She'll drop a pin there, and she'll navigate towards that spot and just sit there for hours until that orangutan moves. And then once she's got eyes on it, she'll just keep following him, whether he likes it or not. And that's how you habituate it. And she'll follow him until he builds a nest in the evening, because they'll always do that eventually. even if you are following them and they're annoyed about you following them. And then she goes back to camp, gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning, goes back to where he built his nest and sits there and waits for him to wake up, and then follows him again for a whole day until he builds his next nest. So it takes some commitment. But so thanks to Wendy's commitment, we've been able to see some orangutans that she was following, because we could just go where she was. And long story short, we can identify some of the individuals as well, especially with the males, because they fight with each other. And you see this one has a big scar on his flange over there. And they've often got all sorts of scars. And so you can actually identify individuals by the pattern of scars on their face. And so this is not one that we've seen in the flesh that I'm aware of. But yeah, they're handsome fellows, aren't they? Shall I play you that call, you think?
Yes, please, Frank. And while you're looking for that, maybe I'll just add that the reason that we want the orangutans to be habituated is so that then we can actually start to study their behavior. So once they don't mind that people are watching them, we can actually watch and see what they do, see how far they would usually travel in a day, what they might eat. And that's really, really helpful for understanding exactly what their life history is, right? Yeah, and also for understanding how they use this diverse habitats that they've got within their ranges, because these are quite wide-ranging animals, and that habitat diversity that I showed, it's actually within the kind of the home ranges of a typical orangutan. They'll be able to access different habitat types, so we can actually, if we can follow them, we can get a much better idea of how they use these different habitats and what different foods they might get from these different habitats. Because it might be actually that it's important not to preserve like the most productive habitat, but that they are using different habitats at different times of the year, and it's that kind of habitat complementarity, so that they might be using one habitat that provides most of their food, but that particular habitat type might have virtually no food for a couple of months of the year, and it'll be that period that actually limits the population density. If you have another habitat nearby that actually produces food at the other times of the year, then that can actually provide bridging food sources for them. And we think that might actually be going on with these orangutans, that they're using one of the habitat types for in the particularly lean times in their preferred habitats, and they go and eat flowers in this other habitat and stuff in there. But yeah, so if we can actually follow those individuals, we can get a much better idea of how they use these different habitats and how important these different habitat types are. And let me play you this noise. So this is a recording that Wendy Earp made again. So this is the long call. There are several phases to it, but you'll notice. So he starts with this kind of bubbling. I'm just going to fast forward him because this guy was really keeps going. They always end like this with these low notes. Now, in a second, he's going to make a different noise. Wait for it. Wait for it. That one. So, did you hear that? So it sounds like someone blowing their nose, and then you hear the kind of white noise after that as well. So what's going on there
Read that bit. The noise of it blowing, someone blowing their nose, that is actually the orangutan doing that. It's what's called the Kiss Squeak. So at this point, he realized he was being watched by Wendy, or he was expressing his annoyance about being watched. Maybe he was aware of it already. And that Kiss Squeak noise is their threat noise. This is how they let you know that they're not impressed with you being there. It's not the most threatening noise in the world, is it? But then that kind of white noise, the whoosh that you heard, that is him probably moving through the branches. So he was starting to move away then. And often when they're making their kiss squeaking and you stay close and they get really annoyed, this is when they start breaking off branches and they start throwing the branches at you. They might even push over dead trees. This is where it gets quite dangerous. You really want to keep your distance from them in those cases.
Well, Frank, sorry, I was going to say that this is probably a good time to wrap up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless you have something else specific to say about that long call.
Well, I could tell you a little anecdote about it, because it's such an exciting noise to hear when you're walking around the forest and you hear a noise like that. You know, when you hear a long call like that, you know there's an orangutan nearby. And one particular day, we heard one from a long way away, and this was at the end of a really long day, and I was with a couple of students, and morale was a bit low, let's put it mildly. We still had a long way to go to camp, and we heard a long call. So in an attempt to lift morale, I imitated the orangutan long call, just for a laugh. And much to our surprise, we got a response from another orangutan that was much closer to us. And I called back, and then we heard him calling back again. And then we heard a third one, close to the first one that we'd heard as well. Anyway, so we started moving towards them. It turned out when we got there, the second orangutan that had responded wasn't an orangutan. That was my colleague, Wendy, who was doing playback experiments. Well, she was coming back from doing playback experiments. She had a big speaker with her. And so she heard my long call and the response from the real orangutan. And so she played one through her speaker to see if she could get a response. And so the real orangutan got really, really cross with hearing her speaker, and came straight to her and down the tree, right down to the speaker, and then spotted her and the student who was with her, and went back up the tree and got really angry and started throwing branches. And this was the point that we arrived, me and my students. So there was a really angry orangutan there. And so we hung well back from him because he was seriously pissed off. And as Wendy pointed out, as the experienced orangutan researcher, that what I had done was really stupid, because if he hadn't come down to that speaker, he would have come down to me, and he would have, he might have pulled my arms out. So I've been told never to do that again.
Well, that's an excellent note to end on. Thanks, Frank. So yeah, thank you very much, Frank. I've just loved hearing about Borneo and about your research there. I hope that everyone listening has too. And just to remind everybody that this is part of the Centre for Ecology and Conservation summer sessions, where we're trying to show the world, and hopefully the students that want to come here next year or the year after, we're trying to show them all about the research and the teaching that we do and that our staff and our students engage in. And I just think that this has been the most fantastic opening introduction to that. It's been great to hear you talking about these things off the cuff with so much confidence and just, yeah, so much eloquence, Frank. Thank you very much. And
well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for everyone for sticking with us as well.
Absolutely. Okay, I'll let you end it then, Frank.
Well, thank you very much. Good night.